Om Sarashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parampara. Om. Be seated, please. Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome back. Welcome also to the many students attending these classes online. Let me fix that. All right, we continue this section of Uddhava Gita, the current chapter, giving the vibhutis, the glories of Ishvara, the glories of Krishna, as we saw in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10. We see here in Uddhava Gita chapter 11, coincidentally, it goes on and on in the same manner. And I said go on and on. Some of you may feel that some of this sounds repetitive. It is. Deliberately repetitive. Why? Notice verse after verse after verse. By the way, we're towards the end of it, so it won't be going on much longer. But it continues. Every verse talking about glories of Ishvara. These are glories, those are glories, also these are glories, all these glories of Ishvara. Why this repetitiveness, both here and in the Bhagavad Gita, and perhaps in some other places we can find as well. Bear in mind that being repetitive is not considered helpful. To make my point, being repetitive is not considered helpful. Being repetitive is not, you get my point, all right. In fact, in ancient times, before writing was used much, when things were maintained through an oral tradition, there was a famous statement that said, if you compose a verse and save even one syllable, saving one syllable is as wonderful as the birth of a son. That was their emphasis on brevity, what to speak of repetition. So in that oral tradition, repetition is an obvious defect. So why do we see this repetition here? And similarly in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, there are some places where repetition is necessary. Those of you who have raised children know this better than me. You tell children once, and it doesn't work. Sometimes repetition is absolutely necessary. And here, it's absolutely necessary not to impart knowledge. This is a difference. When teachings are imparting a particular kind of knowledge, in that kind of teaching, repetition is a defect. You should not, there's no necessity to be repetitive if you're teaching something. But if your intention is to change the way a person thinks, if your intention is, if the intention of a text or teaching is not to impart knowledge, but to shift your worldview, to shift your mode of thinking, to shift your perspective. That's a nice way of putting it. Then, to shift your perspective, doesn't happen instantly. To rewire all these neurons in our brain doesn't happen instantly. So for that sake, for creating a bhava, let's call it creating a new samskara, a new healthy habit of thinking, impression in your mind. To create such a healthy impression takes repetition. Now let me be very specific. We grow up in a relatively materialistic culture, and we grow up to be consumers. Naturally, we want to gather, what did I write? I wrote this many years ago. I haven't used this. We grow up to be greedy consumers of worldly pleasures. Ooh. But it's a fact. That's how we're raised. When we become greedy, because have you got enough yet? Greedy is true. We don't feel like we've got as much as you have. We'd like a little more, please, a little more. So, greedy is not off the mark. We grow up in a materialistic culture to be greedy consumers of worldly pleasures. That's our perspective, that's our worldview, and that is what this chapter addresses. And chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, Vibhuti Yoga, addresses how, by coming to see everything in the world not as materialistic stuff that we want to enjoy, not as worldly pleasures. I wrote this down. So we convert our thinking from being greedy consumers of worldly pleasures to become grateful recipients of Ishvara's blessings. Wow. That's a huge transformation of thinking. We start off necessarily as greedy consumers of worldly pleasures. We want to become grateful recipients of Ishvara's blessings. That gratitude comes when we see all this as Ishvara's blessings. When whatever we receive in our lives, whatever comes to us, whether it's family or material things, whatever it is that comes to us, we come to see it as Ishvara's blessings. And therefore we receive it not with a sense of greed, how little more, but rather we receive it with gratitude. So, we are engaged in a series of verses which are deliberately repetitive, trying to instill in us this new perspective, this change of perspective where we give up being a greedy consumer of worldly pleasures and we cultivate a new attitude, the attitude of being grateful recipients of Ishvara's blessings. Previously, we've called this very simply Ishvara Bhava. So to have that sense that we are in relationship with Ishvara, receiving things from Ishvara, and all of this, if you remember the very beginning of this chapter, all based on the Vedantic understanding that all this is Ishvara. All. In fact, in Pujya Swamiji's ashram in Coimbatore, they have outside of the kutir where he used to live, they have this huge plaque, monument. All this is Ishvara. Very nice, one of his very powerful teachings. So, with that introduction, we can pick up the thread and continue our process of cultivating this perspective of being grateful recipients of Ishvara's blessings by seeing all this as Ishvara. Brahmanyanam baliraham Brahmanyanam baliraham Viranamaham Arjunaha Viranamaham Arjunaha Bhutanam stitirutpattir Bhutanam stitirutpattir Aham vai pratisankramaha Aham vai pratisankramaha. And you'll recognize the style, continues. Among all these, Sri Krishna says, I am the best, I am the greatest. Among every category of existence, he says, I am the shining example, I am the best example. Not that Sri Krishna is only present as the best of the best, but we recognize Sri Krishna in the best of the best. We've discussed this before. So, Brahmanyanam, among all those who are holy, who are blessed, who are pious or devout, Sri Krishna says, Balihi aham. King Bali, you remember from a story. By the way, most of these stories are in the same Bhagavata Purana from which our Uddhava Gita is excerpted. So the story of King, it's a long, complicated story. The short version is that King Bali decides to give this little fellow. He says, I'm going to give this little Vamana, was the name of this little fellow, actually an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. But this little fellow asked for some land, as much as he could cover in 3 steps. And King Bali was very generous. He didn't hesitate. After all, how much land could this little fellow cover in 3 steps? Well, with his first step, remember, Vamana was an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. With his first step, he covered the entire earth. With his second step, he covered the heavens. What's left? King Bali says, the only thing left is me. Put your third step here. So it was this absolute surrender indicated by King Bali. For this reason, Sri Krishna singles him out as an example of one who is the most holy, is King Bali, Mahabali. Then, Viranam. So it means when Viran, I'll come back to that. Viranam, among the courageous, among mighty warriors, among the courageous. He says, Aham, not surprisingly, Arjuna. Among the most courageous, I am Arjuna, the hero of the Mahabharata. So Arjuna being courageous in this sense. Yes, indeed, he was arguably the best warrior on the battlefield, although some people would argue Karna was a little better. Perhaps, we don't know. But anyway, we'll just take Arjuna as being the mightiest warrior. But that doesn't make him the most courageous. What made Arjuna most courageous is to follow Dharma even when it's difficult, right? Arjuna faced the difficulty of fighting against his own family members. And he understood that he had to, because to fail to fight would cause more harm to society than fighting. This was a dharma yuddha. It was a fight to reduce the amount of harm caused to people. Arjuna understood that. He went out and followed his dharma in spite of this tremendous difficulty that he faced. So, for this reason, he is singled out by Sri Krishna as being the most courageous. Of course, it helps, that Arjuna was also Sri Krishna's, what is the expression they use? BFF. his best friend forever. So it was. So maybe that helps in Sri Krishna choosing Arjuna here. Then, Bhutanam, for all creatures, including you and me, and everything that exists. Sri Krishna says in the last line, Aham, I am what? I am Sthiti, Utpatti, and Pratisankramaha. You can figure it out mostly. Utpatti, I am the source of creation. I am Sthiti, I am the maintenance of all creation, and I am Pratisankramaha. Pratisankrama is that which gets reversed. At the end of time, the universe which came forth from Ishvara returns to Ishvara at the end of time. That's the meaning of Pratisankrama. So Sri Krishna says, I am the origin, sustenance, and the one unto whom everything returns at the end of time. All of this is to help us cultivate Ishvara Bhava. Next. Satyuk yut sargo paranam. Gat yuk yut sargo paranam. Ananda sparsha lakshanam, ananda sparsha lakshanam, aswada shrutya vagranam, aswada shrutya vagranam, aham sarvendriyendriyam, aham sarvendriyendriyam. Lots of words sandwiched together here. So here he's talking about the faculties of a human being. These faculties that we possess as human beings are also the glories of Ishvara, Ishvara's vibhutis. What are those faculties? There are 5 karma indriyas, 5 faculties of acting, motion, including gati. You have to peel these words apart here. Gati, walking. Ukti, speaking. Utsarga is excretion. Utpadana is actually the procreation. And he left out grasping. There are 5 altogether. We got 4 of the 5 here. These are called karma indriyas, 5 faculties of action. Then there are 5 faculties of knowledge. Sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell, which he calls ananda sparsha lakshanam. These 5 faculties of 5 sense faculties called jnana indriya. I think that's might be the fan that's causing that. These 5 faculties of sense organs, these 5 senses, are sparsha lakshanam. They're characterized by contact with the world that brings ananda. Actually, not always ananda, because we can, but sorry to make this comment, but walking around in India, you can, and especially in not very nice places, you have plenty of sensations that are not so pleasant. What you see, what you smell, etc., and noisy. My gosh. Anyway. So not always ananda lakshana, sometimes the other. Anyway. And what are those sense faculties? Aswada, taste. Shruti, hearing. Avagrana, smell. He's left out sight and touch. So we've got 3 of the 5 senses here. So Sri Krishna says, I am these faculties of acting. I am these faculties of sense. And things we take for granted every single day, right? Imagine, just for fun. So we've described 5 faculties. Which would you give up? Not a one of them. They're all they're also valuable and important in our lives. So, would you rather be blind, deaf, or, numb? All of these faculties are so important. They give us the human capacity, a capacity that we really, really take for granted. Plenty of people can't hear. Plenty of people can't see. Plenty of people can't walk. We struck the jackpot. The jackpot is not that big lottery. The jackpot is having all of these faculties. This is that Ishvara Bhava, grateful recipient of Ishvara's blessings. That's what we're cultivating. Sri Krishna ends this verse saying, Aham sarvendriya indriyam. I am the indriya of all the indriyas. I am the sense by which all the sensations are known, which means all of these faculties, 10 we've described here, they all function because you are a conscious being. And Sri Krishna says here, as he says again and again and again in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Uddhava Gita, Sri Krishna says, I am that consciousness present in your experience right now that allows you to function as a sentient being. So I am the sentience of all the senses. I think last week or the week before, we talked about a glory that's missing here because it's a glory that we know through science. And that glory is evolution. So Sri Krishna, if he were writing this today, he would say, of all the laws of nature, I am the law of random mutation and natural selection. This is how the scholars describe evolution. It's a two-step process. That process of evolution is definitely a glory. Think, this is not the time for a long scientific discussion, but the evolution of your power of sight, eyeballs, is something absolutely remarkable. Scientists have actually struggled with this issue for decades, trying to understand how could this power of sight evolve. Taste is a little easier to understand. So some amoeba gets some sweet sensation coming in through its cellular wall. So you can understand how a sense of taste could evolve. But sense of sight, amoebas don't have eyeballs. How did single-cell animals evolve to have the power of sight? This is just showing the glory of this powerful natural process of evolution, also Ishvara's glory. Then, this is going to take some explanation, all right? Prithvi Vayur Akasha, Prithvi Vayur Akasha, Apo Jyotiraham Mahan, Apo Jyotiraham Mahan, Vikara Purusho Vyaktam, Vikara Purusho Vyaktam, Rajas Sattvam Tamah Param, Rajas Sattvam Tamah Param. So Sri Krishna says he is manifest in the glories of the teachings of Sankhya. Of course, you're all experts about the teachings of Sankhya. You understand the 24 tattvas? 24 tattvas? Huh? What? Okay. They're all here. And allow me to go to the board and just sketch it out really, really quickly, just to get the outline. Sankhya in ancient times was just as important as Vedanta. It kind of fell behind in part because it's a dualistic system, Vedanta being a non-dualistic system. Someone will need to turn on the light, please. All right. So this is a 1 minute, I don't think anyone's done this in 1 minute. Time me, I probably won't either. So the system of Sankhya begins with Prakriti, at least a familiar word, nature. But nature here as the universe in an unmanifest condition, which becomes partially manifest as Mahat, and then becomes further manifest, I'm trying to make 1 minute, becomes further manifest as Ahankara. Not Ahankara as the mental faculty, but as a principle of differentiation. Then Ahankara becomes differentiated into Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Then Sattva becomes further differentiated into those 10 faculties that we saw in a prior verse, plus mind and other faculties. Tamas becomes differentiated into 5 subtle elements and 5 gross elements. And added up, it should be approximately 24. I might have missed something down here. So we got 24 principles, and then there's a 25th, Purusha, which is like the little similar to consciousness in the Vedantic tradition. Did I make 1 minute? No use timing me. Anyway, I tried. So this is Sankhya Mata, the teachings of Sankhya in 1 minute, so that we can understand this verse. All right. So, and what he's doing is referring to all of these aspects of Sankhya. So he begins with those the 5 subtle elements and 5 gross elements, which are Prithivi, earth, Vayu, air, Akasha, space, Apaha, water, and Jyotihi, meaning fire in this case. So of those 25, we've got 5 are listed here, and then there are 5 subtle and 5 gross. So that comes up to 10. And then at the end of the line, you saw Mahan. Remember, we went from Prakriti to Mahat to Ahankara. So Mahan is Mahat, that middle one. Aham is Ahankara, the third one. And if you look in the third line end, Avyaktam is another word for Prakriti. So those are the first 3. Prakriti or Avyakta, differentiating into Mahat, further differentiating into Ahankara. You don't need, I'm just explaining the words Sri Krishna is using here in the verse. You don't have to understand all the philosophy behind it. Then, also all the vikaras in the third line. Vikaras are all the other modifications, as I mentioned, the 5 sense organs, 5 organs of action, all those are vikaras. And then at the last line, we have Rajas, Sattvam, and Tamas. We have the 3 gunas, which were the first differentiation from Ahankara. And then finally, the number 25th is Purusha, consciousness. So Sri Krishna here in 1 verse makes a reference to all 25 of these principles which are enumerated in the system of Sankhya. Not surprisingly, Sankhya means enumeration. That's the meaning of the word. So Sankhya is an ancient school of thought, like Vedanta, that's based on this enumeration of 24 or 25 principles. This verse actually completes in the 1/2. There's an extra half to this verse, so we'll see that here. Ahametat prasankyanam, ahametat prasankyanam, jnanam tattva tattva vinishchayaha yanam e. So he says, aham, I am etat sankhyanam. I am this enumeration, the enumeration of the Sankhyas, and that enumeration is jnanam, it's spiritual wisdom. That enumeration is tattva vinishchayaha, it's ascertainment of these 24 tattvas. Tattva are these 24 principles that are taught. So Sri Krishna here, interesting, he's glorifying himself. Pretty big egotist? That's not the point here, obviously. And actually, remember what he says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, and he's going to say similarly here, Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, he'll say similarly here, he'll say, everything I've told you is just as little hint, just as little taste, a little preview of my greatness. So he's not bragging, and that's not the point anyway. Remember, this is all about cultivating Ishvara Bhava. So he says, I am these 24 principles plus one, Purusha, enumerated by the teachings of Sankhya. If he were to say, among the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, he would say, I am Tat Tvam Asi. If he were to say, among the teachings of Nyaya, the school of logic, he would say, I am Anumana, inference, the most important tool of logic. If he were to say, I am the school of Vaisheshika, you don't have to know all the details, but these are these ancient schools of thought. So if he were to say, among all the teachings of Vaisheshikas, I am the Anuvada, the teachings about anus, atoms. I am this atomic theory. And if he were there are 6 traditional schools of thought. So if he were to say, among all the teachings of the Mimamsakas, teachings on rituals, he would probably say, I am the Vidhi, I am the instructions for doing all those rituals, pointing out that he is the most important factor in every situation, including this situation right now, just for fun. How do you know you'll take another breath? You know, I could suffer a massive stroke right at this moment, and it's over. There won't be another breath. You finish one exhalation, and you're done. It's possible. My next breath is Ishvara's blessings. This is that Ishvara Bhava that we want to cultivate. Ishvara is present in every aspect of our lives, blessing us in innumerable ways. Okay, we continue. Mayeshvarena jivena, Mayeshvarena jivena, Gunena guninavena, Gunena guninavena, Sarvatmanapi sarvena, Sarvatmanapi sarvena, Na bhavo vidyate kvachata, Na bhavo vidyate kvachata. Good. Start at the end. Na bhavaha vidyate kvachit. Na kvachit bhavaha. Nothing at all vidyate would exist. And now we have to chase around and get two more words. Nothing at all would exist. Second line end, vina, without. And the first line, first word, maya, without me. Nothing at all would exist without me. Notice we have to chase around in the verse a little bit to get all these words. These verses are in a certain form. The words are not in prose order, so we have to put them back into prose order. So nothing at all would exist maya vena, without me. Nothing would exist, and remember our understanding, all this is Ishvara. Sarvam kalvidam brahma, says in the Chandogya Upanishad. All this is Ishvara. So what wouldn't exist without me, Sri Krishna, what wouldn't exist without Sri Krishna is Ishvarena. Sri Krishna would not exist in the form of Ishvara. Nor would Sri Krishna, Ishvara, the creator, sustainer, destroyer, as we saw before. Nor would Sri Krishna exist as Jivena, you and me. Nor would Sri Krishna exist as Gunena, as gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Nor would Sri Krishna exist as Gunina. That which possesses guna is gunin. So this color is guna, cloth is gunin. So Sri Krishna says that you would have no color without me, no guna. You'd have no cloth without me, no guni. And he says further, there would not exist anything sarvatmana api, the inner self of all. Without me, there would be no inner self, no consciousness. As we said just before, Sri Krishna is within you as your own true self, consciousness. And Sri Krishna says, nothing would exist. Sarvena. Sri Krishna says, I exist as everything, all material things. Nothing would exist without me. This is it. He's expressed the whole thing in this verse. Nothing means nothing. Nothing would exist without Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna here identifying himself with Brahman, the underlying reality because of which everything exists. And we understand that Brahman through our human perspective, and we relate to that Brahman as Ishvara, creator, sustainer, destroyer, leading us to Ishvara Bhava. Everything exists because of Ishvara. Everything exists because of Sri Krishna, leading us to this appreciation that we have. I gave this cloth example. I have a cloth to wear, which if I didn't, it would be a little embarrassing right now. So it's a good thing. This cloth is a blessing received from Ishvara. This body is a blessing received from Ishvara. These eyes, ears, my power of speech, watch this, my ability to teach, and the content of what I teach. Both. My ability to teach is a blessing of Ishvara, and the content, the teachings I'm sharing with you. These are all blessings of Ishvara. I've done it with regard to myself. You do it with regard to yourself. What are your blessings? We have this tendency, and you know this very well. We have a tendency to look at our lives and see only what's wrong with our lives. And not surprisingly, there are some things that are wrong and some things that might even be terribly wrong in our lives. Wrong meaning problematic, difficult, painful, difficult. But the opposite is also true. There are many problems in your life. There are also many blessings in your life. But when you only pay attention to the problems seem to outnumber the blessings. Suppose you shift your perspective from paying attention to the problems to paying attention to the blessings, in which case the blessings will outnumber the problems. It's a matter of your perspective. You know, the famous story, the glass is half empty or half full. It's up to you. You get to choose how, this is an important statement. Not that everything I'm saying, anyway. Which means everything I've said up to now is useless, but this is important. Okay. Here it is. You get to choose how you see your life. You can choose to focus on the problems of your life. You can choose to see yourself as the recipient of Ishvara's blessings. Up to you. Entirely up to you. Okay. Then, we'll finish these 2 more verses. Okay. Okay. Sankhyanam paramanunam, Sankhyanam paramanunam, kalena kriyate maya, kalena kriyata maya, natata me vibhutinam, natata me vibhutinam, srijatondani kotishaha, srijatondani kotishaha. Sankhyanam maya kriyate. He says, maya kriyate, I can do this. I can do what? Sankhyanam. I can count. Sankhyanam kriyate maya. I can count paramanunam. Every anu, atom, parama anu is that out of which atoms are made. There's the early concept of fundamental particle. So Sri Krishna says, I can count every atom that exists in the universe, kalena, if you give me enough time. With enough time, Sri Krishna says, I can count every single atom in the universe. By the way, scientists using mathematical tools actually can give you a number. They can actually calculate their estimate. And they'll say, according to our estimate, this is the number of atoms in the universe. They can do that. The mathematics, you can do all that. So Sri Krishna says, I cannot Sri Krishna isn't talking about estimating the number of atoms, like science can estimate the number of atoms. Sri Krishna says, I can count them one by one. If you give me enough time. Kalena. Why? Because the number of atoms in the universe is finite. Universe is finite. But something is infinite. He says, natata, it's not the same. Me, for me. Me vibhuti nam. It's not the same with regard to my glories. My glories, which are srijataha, for me, the one who is srijataha, the one who has created andani. Literally, eggs. But here referring to universes. This universe is understood as an egg. That's interesting. In ancient times, they thought that the universe looked like an egg. What do scientists think the universe looks like? That which started with the Big Bang? Maybe like an egg, perhaps? Perhaps that's a similar view to modern science. The universe looks like an egg. So here, andani, kotishaha, thousands and millions of universes, which can't be counted. He says, my glories. Let me paraphrase the verse so you can get the drama. He wants this verse to be very dramatic. So Sri Krishna says, If you give me enough time, I can count one by one every single atom in the universe, because the number of atoms in the universe are finite in number. But it is utterly impossible for me to count all my vibhutis. My vibhutis are not finite in number, because my vibhutis are not simply responsible for the glories in this universe, but responsible for the glories in every universe. So far, he's only talking about the glories in this universe. What about in all the other universes? So he says that even though the atoms in this universe are finite in number, Sri Krishna says, my glories, my vibhutis are infinite in number, numberless, countless. Okay. So he says, counting one by one. By counting one by one, you're counting atoms in the universe. Can you ever count up to infinity? You're almost there. Almost there. Infinity minus one. In mathematics, infinity minus one is still infinite. You can't get there by counting one by one by one. That's what he says about his glories. This is just a nice poetry, trying to be very dramatic and inspire us using, how about that? He's inspiring us using mathematics. This verse is mathematics, right? He's comparing that which is finite to that which is infinite. So we are being inspired by Sri Krishna's mathematics. Okay, we'll see. I think so. That's how I see the verse. We'll see one more verse. By the way, this next verse is the last of his vibhutis that will be narrated in this chapter. There are a few more verses in the chapter, but this next verse is the conclusion of his narration of the glories, his vibhutis. Tejashri kirtiraishwaryam, Tejashri kirtiraishwaryam, Christyaga saubhagam bhagaha, Christyaga saubhagam bhagaha, Viryam titiksha vijnanam, Viryam titiksha vijnanam, Yatra yatra samem shakaha, Yatra yatra samem shakaha. So, last narration of glories. Not surprisingly, he returns to human qualities. Human qualities, because perhaps that's where we have the maximum opportunity to see the glories of God. He says you can see his vibhutis in the tejas, the brightness, brilliance of a person. Also in shrihi, in the wealth of a person. Wealth, not financial wealth, but wealth in the sense of, say, the person's maturity, the person's, actually, you're going to have a whole list of other attributes, so let's just see. The kirti, the greatness or glory of a person, the aishwaryam, the power, the mastery of a person. You've been to music concerts where you see someone who is just an extraordinary performer of whatever the music style, whatever the instrument is. You've seen such performers. Someone who is a master in musical performance, there you also see the vibhuti of Ishvara. Also, hrihi, very important to go along with all the other ones, because if you have mastery and greatness and wealth, if you don't have hrihi, humility, you have a problem. So humility comes along with all these wonderful characteristics, because as much as you have, there's someone who has 10 times more, right? In any field, whatever you accomplish, no matter how much money you make, how will that stand up to the richest people in the world? Whatever you have, somebody has 10 times more. So this is a basis for hrihi, humility, tyaga, renunciation, a main principle we've been talking about throughout this text, the fact that worldly pleasures never lead to permanent contentment, leading to tyaga, saubhagyam. We are all blessed with so many pleasures. We have bhaga, we have God's blessings. We have viryam, strength. We have titiksha, patience. These are all glories of the human being. We have vijnanam, intelligence. Now, the point of all this, he's just giving a summary of these wonderful qualities that human beings embody. And obviously, it's not a complete list. A complete list would go on for days and days and days, verse after verse after verse. But his point is, yatra yatra, wherever you see these qualities, saha me amshakaha. Saha, that quality is me amshaka. That quality is an amsha, a little bit of me, of me. Wherever you see in another human being, wherever you see these wonderful, beautiful human qualities, the greatness of the human condition, whatever you see is me amshakaha, like a little spark of the shining light. Sparks of the greatness, sparks of the sun. You can imagine a huge bonfire, and when the wood shifts around, you get all these sparks flying up into the dark sky. We're all sparks. In this case, sparks of whom? Sparks of the divine, sparks of divinity. All of this can really help us cultivate that Ishvara Bhava. So to see, you are a spark of the divine, I am a spark of the divine, then it gets more challenging. To see, how about this? To see our wonderful politicians as sparks of the divine. Politics is such a mess nowadays, so it's a little irony we bring up here at the end of the class. But yes, there are some sparks which are brighter than others. And when we're talking about our politicians, there are some sparks which are not quite as bright as the others. So it goes. But the fact remains, we are all sparks of divinity. All human greatness is an amsha, a little portion of Sri Krishna's greatness. So this brings us to the end of the vibhutis, cultivating Ishvara Bhava, that sense that we are grateful recipients of Ishvara's many blessings. And we'll finish this chapter in the next class. There's a very nice concluding part. We'll see that next week. Closing announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our Upadesha Sahasri class at 10 o'clock. Come and join us for Shankaracharya's wonderful teachings. At 11 o'clock, we're back to our original schedule. At 11 o'clock is satsang. Come with your questions. And then next Saturday, I'll give you a heads up, we'll be celebrating Guru Purnama. And the way we'll do it, I think like last year also, at the meditation time at 10 o'clock, we'll begin with a simple puja at our Guru altar. And immediately after the puja, then we'll do some form of meditation. I haven't decided, haven't thought about it yet, but some meditative practice will follow Guru Puja, and that will be next week at 10 o'clock. This class will continue as usual next week. Also, let me mention that we've started having brief volunteer meetings immediately after every Saturday class. So after we've finished our prayers at the altar, you can go downstairs. Jim is running these very brief meetings for seva, for volunteer work. You can go and join Jim and the others for that brief meeting, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashrinvan Uttabasida Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.